You know, sometimes the most incredible stories aren't in the news, they're buried in legal documents. And today, we're digging into a really landmark case, one where a court had to make a huge choice: stick to the black and white letter of the law, or find a way to do what's right. This is a story about what happens when a whole life built on a lie, comes crashing into the legal system. Okay, let's get into it. So, it all kicks off with this number: 14 years. Just think about that for a second. For 14 years, a woman named Narinder Pal Kaur lived her life believing she was married. I mean, that's not just a number, right? That's a huge chunk of your life. It's the foundation you build everything on. And you know, during that time, she wasn't just waiting around. She was living. She was a wife through and through. She was a mom raising two daughters. She ran the home, she built a family, and the whole time, she genuinely believed 100% that her marriage was real. So here's the kicker. The question at the heart of this whole thing: what if, after all that, after 14 years of building a life and a family, the law suddenly turned around and said, nope, none of it was real? Can you even imagine that? So, how on earth did this happen? Let's walk through how her entire world got turned upside down. Okay, so the story starts back in 1977. Narinder gets married to a guy named Manjeet Singh. He tells her he's a bachelor. But here's the thing, he wasn't. He was already married, but she had absolutely no clue. So for the next 14 years, they live together, they have two daughters, they build a whole life. Then, boom, 1991. She comes home one day and finds herself locked out of her own house. And that's when she finally finds out the devastating truth. So naturally, after being left with nothing, she goes to the court for financial support, maintenance. But this is where she hits a wall, a really cruel legal loophole. And get this, the loophole was basically his own lie being used against her. And this slide just lays out the whole conflict perfectly, doesn't it? On her side, you've got reality: 14 years together, two kids, a home. But on his side, you have this cold, calculated legal argument. He said, hey, since I was already married, our marriage was never legally real. It was void from the start. His conclusion? She was never his legally wedded wife, so he didn't owe her a thing. He was literally using his own fraud as a get-out-of-jail-free card. And the fancy legal term for his argument is void ab initio. It's Latin, and it just means the whole thing is treated as invalid right from the beginning, like it never ever happened in the eyes of the law. And here's the crazy part. At first, it actually worked. The trial court sided with him. They looked at the law literally, word for word, and said, well, technically, she's not a legally wedded wife. So they threw her case out. Just unbelievable. A totally devastating blow for her. But she didn't give up. She appealed to the high court. And this, right here, is where the whole story changes. It goes from being about a terrible injustice to a search for what the law is really all about. The high court decided it needed to dig a lot deeper. And the judges boiled the whole thing down to one simple, powerful question. Can we really let a person get away with something just because they were the one who did the wrong thing in the first place? I mean, should the law really protect someone who committed fraud? That simple question became their North Star for the whole case. So that led them to a totally different approach. They decided to stop looking at just the exact words of the law, and instead to ask a much bigger question. What was this law's fundamental purpose? Okay, now we're getting to the really good part. This is where the court basically put on its detective hat to figure out the law's real intention. And the official name for this is purposive interpretation. Basically, instead of just reading the instruction manual word for word, you ask, what is this thing supposed to do? You look at the problem the law was designed to fix, and then you read it in a way that actually, fixes it. And their logic was just brilliant. So first, they looked at the actual text of the law, and they found this really important clue. The law says a wife can get maintenance if her husband has any other wife living. So the court's like, wait a minute. If the law wanted to exclude all second wives, why would that line even be in there? It doesn't make sense. Then they pointed out that the law makes a big difference between a wife and a concubine. And Narinder, who had a wedding and lived as a wife for 14 years, she was definitely not a concubine. So putting it all together, they figured out the law's real goal wasn't to get caught up in legal jargon. It was to stop women from being abandoned and left with nothing. And they even pulled up this amazing quote from another big case. It basically says, you can't let someone hide behind a smokescreen of legal technicalities to get out of their responsibilities. using these little legalistic niceties, as the judge called them, completely destroys the whole point of these laws in the first place. So the big question is, what did all this mean in the real world? What was the final impact of this landmark ruling? Well, the decision was a total 180. The High Court completely overturned the first ruling. They said that for the purpose of this law, considering the fraud and the 14 years she put in, Narinder was going to be treated as a wife. She was entitled to maintenance. Finally, it felt like justice was served. And look, the impact of this goes way beyond just this one case. It set a huge precedent. It sends a message loud and clear that the law is there to protect victims of this kind of fraud. You can't benefit from your own lies. It also upholds the dignity of women like Narinder, saying, no, you are not a concubine. And at the end of the day, it just hammers home that the whole point of these laws is social justice, to help people, not to let cheaters win on a technicality. And all of this leaves us with one last big question to chew on. What do we want our justice system to be? Should it be about rigidly following the rules, word for word, even if it leads to an outcome that feels totally wrong? Or should it be about finding fairness, about understanding the spirit of the law? It's definitely something to think about.